not holding that against him. We're very happy for him. So I'm going to turn it over to you because they're not here to hear me, they're here to hear me. So DJ Graham, thank you again.
So thank you all so much for being here today. A couple of things that I want to preface. So first, I'm really excited to be back and working with PV. When Elizabeth and Karen messaged me about the opportunity to present, I was very excited to come back and share and work. PV schools is very near and dear to my heart. I went through elementary through high school. I worked here for several years. My daughter attends and we couldn't help but laugh, but I was like, man, this kid is too smart for me already. But so PV schools are very close to my heart. I was very excited to come and share, especially about the topic of working with students who are perfectionists. So a couple things, if you've never seen one of my presentations, there are a couple things that I need to address. So first, I like to involve the people sitting here. So there are going to be times when I'm going to ask for your feedback, your guidance, your thoughts, what perspectives you have. I want to hear those. I want to engage with those. The other thing is my presentations get a little weird at times. There's going to be a lot of stories. There's going to be a lot of pop culture clips built in. Before I became a parent, my clips used to be a lot cooler. Like they were from Avengers and Taylor Swift. And now that I'm a parent, most of my pop culture is aimed at toddlers. So the content itself is going to shift, but my hope is that it still makes sense and that you can trust me along the way. So first thing is, at the end of this, we are going to be doing a raffle. I wrote a book. So at the end of this, we will be doing a raffle for a copy of my book. So please stay through the end. That's my way of getting you to not leave like 10 minutes in where you're like, what is this guy talking about? So it is geared toward teachers, but there are lots of lessons I feel are very valuable for parents as well. So what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about a section that I'm calling a former perfectionist. We're going to be looking at gifted perfectionism. We're going to talk about strategies, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. I do not have all of the answers to every question in every scenario. I can share my thoughts and my perspectives as a teacher that has worked with lots of gifted students and lots of parents and trying to help with that. So if I don't have an immediate answer and I need time to think about it or anything, follow up. I am happy to give my information so you can reach out because I don't want you to feel isolated in any of this. But where we're going to go is first looking at a former perfectionist, and that is 6-year-old me. As you can tell, I look pretty much exactly the same as I did then, just less tired and younger at that point. But the reason I include this is growing up, I was identified gifted. So I went through, the universal screening at 2nd grade that they gave. It came back and I got the nonverbal reasoning identification. And so back then, PV was very strict about, there are the 3 qualifications for gifted. There's nonverbal, quantitative, and qualitative. Or quantitative and nonverbal, verbal, and quantitative. And back then, when I was in 2nd grade, I tested gifted in nonverbal and high 90s in the other 2. But they were very strict about, whoa. No, if you tested nonverbal, you are in nonverbal. So 1 day a week, I got gifted services. I got pulled out and I got to do puzzles for an hour every day, and it was awesome. There was an action figure in the Legos that I enjoyed playing with and all that. But so my teachers would go through and be like, okay, we got to get him tested. So the next year I tested in high 90s in 1, but then tested gifted in English. So I was able to do that. And so it finally was able to get all 3. But going through in 2nd grade, so 6 years old, that is where I feel like I became very aware of my own perfectionism. And the story really starts with sitting in class, and I was very regimented. There was a schedule. I was going to follow the schedule. And I remember the teacher going through, we were doing a lesson. I remember looking at the clock and being like, we are past due on what time we should be. We should be going to the next class or next period that we were doing, the next subject. And I remember telling my teacher, Mrs. Geis, we should be in math right now. We shouldn't be in English. And she said, oh my gosh, I lost track of the time. Thank you so much. So in that moment, I became a problem because suddenly I was given like the green light to correct her when we fell off schedule. And so basically from there on, I was a nuisance in that class, telling her we're behind, we should be going to lunch, we should be going to special, we should be going to X, Y, Z. So we'll talk more about that, but that is one of those first moments that I really became attuned to the regimented life that I had. So we're gonna watch a quick poem from a high school. She's in university when she recorded this, but she was a high school senior, and as part of her senior project, she had to write a poem, and she wrote hers about being a perfectionist. So I want us to go ahead and watch this. It's about 6 minutes, but I want you to watch this, take in what she said, and I want you to think about anything that stands out to you from her video.
I am a recovering perfectionist. And as a recovering perfectionist, I can tell you from experience that the side of perfectionism that everyone seems to see is the good side. You know, being a high achiever, academic accolades, seemingly having your life together. But what no one really sees is the fear. The fear of disappointing everyone, the fear of being exposed that one day everyone is going to wake up and see how flawed you really are. The fear that you are a waste of space because you are not and will never be perfect. One day a year ago, I decided to stop pretending that everything was okay. You see, every year at my high school, the seniors write a speech to present in English class, and students usually write about something they've learned through their high school experience or a message that they'd like to leave behind to their younger peers. I decided to share my struggle with perfectionism through a spoken word poem. Today, whenever I perform this poem, I'm taken back to the person I was a year ago, and I'm reminded of how stuck and unhappy I felt, but also the progress I've made since then. And so today, I'm so excited to share with you that poem, An Open Letter to Perfectionism. Dear Perfectionism, you're an old friend of mine. You've been by my side for as long as I can remember. In fact, I don't know what my life would be like without you. Remember in the 4th grade when I'd get less than 100 on a spelling test and you'd tell me it was a testament to my inability to amount to anything? Remember in the 6th grade when I'd turn in an assignment late and of course you would be there to berate me for being so undisciplined and uninspired. Remember how throughout high school you'd sit next to me at award ceremonies, at competitions that I actually enjoyed doing until you began whispering, 2nd place. Might as well have gotten last. 1st place good, 2nd place bad. Remember when you sat me down one day and said, obviously you're too stupid to get it, so let me spell it out for you. P for the people you need to please and the potential you lack. E for the effort you must give, commit to the path. R for the relentless pursuit of the goal, get with the program. F and E for flawlessness and excellence, not fun and excitement, because who needs that when you could be perfect? C for constantly criticizing yourself, your flaws must be exposed. T for all the time you must devote. Did you get it now? Do you understand? Shut up. Don't say you can't do it, you must, because this is what it takes to be good enough. Dear perfectionism, most people have an angel perched on one shoulder, a devil sitting on the other, but I have you. A big brother watching me, driving me insane. You've built a room 101 inside of my brain, and I'm strapped to the chair. On my wrist is a chain, and you've got a cage full of every mistake I've ever made, and there's no escape. Because you've got an evolutionary advantage. These opposable thumbs ain't got nothing on your talons, and yours are virtually irretractable. You're an animal. But you're also ice and fire. The situation's turning dire because you're melting my confidence, leaving me frozen in inaction, burning up my dreams and extinguishing my passion. It's like I have a mental autoimmune disease. Someone help me, please, because my mind is attacking its own thoughts, making it hard to breathe, making me fall to my knees, saying, perfectionism, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm average. I'm sorry that I let you down just like I let everybody else in my life down. And I'm sorry that it will never be enough, that I will never be enough, that I will never be perfect. Dear perfectionism, throughout my life, I've read book after book about utopias and dystopias, how attempting to build the perfect world only ever leads to a devastated one. And so I'm looking in the mirror, hearing you whisper in my ear, realizing your instruction is only driving me to destruction. I'm realizing that a utopia is just a metaphor for everything I've been fighting for, and dystopia is the reality of what my life will turn out to be if I'm constantly trying to be perfect. And so it's finally time. It's time to say goodbye to these bad habits gone awry, because I've learned over the years that perfection isn't worth the tears and that I'll never get there anyway. Dear perfectionism, I had an epiphany that the one who's been letting you control me is me, because I'm the one who put these chains on my brain. I'm the one who keeps myself in pain. But just as I'm the one who can choose to remain the same, I have the power to choose to walk away. And so this is my rejection, my defection from your grasp, because I'm done with this infection. It's all misdirection. I'm overthrowing your reign over my mind along with my obsessive fear of failure. This is what the French call a coup d'etat, a rebellion of an internal nature. And so no longer do you control me, because once I let you go, I'll be free to make mistakes, to finally be me, to come in second place without wanting to scream, to be okay with who I am, and to finally show the world that it's okay for me to be imperfect. Dear perfectionism, I've just finished my first year of university, and there's been some major change, because my freshman 15 wasn't 15 pounds, but the 15 years I lost to self-doubt, because perfectionism, you're just an old friend. And it's time for me to transcend. Dear perfectionism, this is the end. Thank you.
So, what stands out to you about her poem? Emotion? Fear? Self-criticism? So, when I was prepping for this presentation and looking for things, this stood out to me. And what stood out to me about it was just the idea that she was like, I'm done with perfectionism, right? It's in the past, I'm done, I've moved past that. And what stood out to me, though, was my experience actually prepping for this presentation. Because when Elizabeth reached out to me, she reached out to me in like August, and she said, would you like to do a professional development for parents and teachers in the district? And I said, oh my gosh, yes. So we worked out the dates and everything. They're like, awesome, can you do it about perfectionism? I was like, yeah, like all excited. And then she said, can you give me a title and a blurb? And I stopped. And I said, and in my mind, I'm like, this needs to be like a perfect title. It needs to be something to like get people to come to this. Because like, Guy in a Tie talks about perfectionism does not have a good ring to it, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm like trying to figure this out. In my mind, I had already worked through every single part that was going to be in this. I knew the structure that it was going to have. I knew the idea. I even had in my mind pop culture clips I was planning on using. But coming up with that title, I froze. So I did what any good perfectionist does. I just didn't respond. And then Karen it escalated up to Karen, and she sent an email like, hey DJ, we're really excited. Can you send me a title and a blurb? And I said, yeah, I'll get it to you this weekend. I did not get it to her this weekend. There were 4 or 5 emails asking me for this title and presentation. And as much as I want to feel like I've moved past being a perfectionist, I've worked with gifted students, and this is my 14th year teaching. 12 of those have been exclusively with gifted students. I've worked with students on perfectionism. I know all of the research about it. And as much as I want to feel like I have developed past that, it is still there. So I apologize because the title of this is a lie. Instead of Lessons from a Former Perfectionist, it really should be Coping Perfectionist, because all of those feelings are still there. Everything she talks about, that personification of perfectionism as this creature that is looming over you, it's still there. It's different. I'm not writing, well, I actually just finished writing my last paper. I finished my doctorate, so that's exciting. But I'm not worried about grades. But I'm a parent. I didn't write by my daughter. I'm a principal of a school. I've got 120 students that are looking to me to make decisions that guide them. Every one of those feelings are still there. So what we are going to talk about tonight is I want us to address how we can support our gifted students in dealing with perfectionism. So the way that that's going to look is we're going to cover some of the basic foundations of what it means to be gifted, how that lends itself to perfectionism, and then strategies that you can use in supporting your gifted students as we go through. So that is going to be basically our agenda for today. And a big part of this is going to come from my own experience being gifted and perfectionist and working with gifted students. So when we talk about gifted perfectionism, I don't want to assume that where you all are coming from when it comes to gifted education and what it means to be gifted. So we're going to start with basic definitions. And I think one of the best ones is the updated definition from the National Association for Gifted Children. All right? They say students with gifting talents perform or have the capability to perform at higher levels compared to others of the same age, experience, and environments in one or more domains. They require modifications to their educational experiences to learn and realize their potential. So there have been a lot of different definitions of gifted education, right? One of the unique things about gifted ed is, unlike special education, which has federal mandates, gifted education is at the whim of each state. So every state basically has their own definitions. The National Association for Gifted Children, they are kind of the big wig when it comes to gifted ed. So a lot of schools and districts and states, they'll look to them for kind of that guidance on what are they saying. So some of the things that I think are important that we need to pull out from this, right, is that idea of perform or have the capability to perform at those higher levels. So when we're talking about gifted ed, typically when I've encountered people, their initial assumption is, oh, gifted students, you've got the easy job, awesome. Like they're all perfect, like we're sitting there, like they're bringing you apples every day, doing their homework, all of those wonderful things. And it's like, not always. They're amazing, and I love working with this population. They all don't always perform at that level. One of the distinctions, and this is more of a teacher piece, is you have gifted students who aren't identified, who haven't been found on a test, haven't been noticed by their teachers. So that's an important distinction with this. But the other piece is that they are, whoa, I forgot that this was a touch screen. That's exciting. That's dangerous. So they perform at higher levels compared to the same age, experience, and environment. So when we are looking at gifted students, we are comparing them to age peers, typically, is where we're looking at that. That is where we're getting that distinction. So when we kind of tailor all of this together, we are also looking at the fact that they require modifications to their educational experiences to realize their potential. This also goes into some additional characteristics. The gifted students can come from all racial, ethnic, and cultural populations, as well as economic strata. They require sufficient access to appropriate learning opportunities to realize their potential. They can have learning and processing disorders that require specialized intervention and accommodation. So there's a concept in gifted education called twice exceptional. Those are students who are gifted and also have a disability. So, and that can be a variety of things, from learning disabilities like dyslexia to ADHD, oppositional defiance. It can be a variety of things, but those two factors can impact one another. When we talk about perfectionism, that can be a really frustrating thing when you're thinking at a really high level, but there are things getting in the way. They need support and guidance to develop socially and emotionally, as well as in their areas of talent. And that is what we are doing here today, addressing how we can support them in that way. And they require varied services based on their changing needs. Some additional characteristics: gifted students learn at an accelerated rate. So what that usually means is in a classroom, typically you'll introduce your concept, and then you have students go through repetitions to learn and reinforce those skills. Gifted students typically require less repetitions than age peers. That means they learn the concept, they can demonstrate it in one go. They're ready to move on to the next concept. There's also this idea of curiosity. Raise your hand if your gifted child is curious. I think most have something that they are curious about, right? Those things that they will dive headfirst into, and it's amazing and it is wonderful. It can also be incredibly frustrating, where you're like, oh my gosh, I have heard so much about dinosaurs. Like, can we talk about something else? Like, it is great. I've had students that, and I'm a history teacher, so every World War II buff that has ever come through any school or classroom that I have taught, they gravitate to me and they're like, well, did you know this about Nazi tanks? And I'm like, I did not. And they proceed to tell me every single part of it. They're curious though. And so those can be really amazing, wonderful things, but they can also be challenges. There's also this concept of overexcitabilities, which is basically how gifted students experience the world. So psychomotor is going to be that physical aspect of movement and engaging. Sensual is going to be the reaction to external stimuli, so that can be positive and negative, right? If you have a gifted child that has difficulty with flows and things like that, that typically is a sensual overexcitability. Intellectual, the vast majority of gifted students are going to fit into the intellectual overexcitability, where they're thinking in such big ways. You have imaginational, where you have those students that are living inside their minds. They're coming up with stories, and every situation that they encounter, they've come up with a new scenario. And then you have emotional, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but many of you, I'm sure, that have gifted students have experienced big emotions, both good and bad. The highs are really high. They watch the sad puppy commercial of him losing his bone, and they are devastated, right? That's where we look at this. Overexcitabilities are basically the way that they engage and experience the world. So what I want us to look at here is, this is a list from of just common characteristics from growing up gifted. How are these characteristics of gifted students' strengths? So you interact with them on a daily basis in a variety of ways. I've had many people that look at me and they're like, you teach gifted kids, you've got the easy job. It's like, not always, but what strengths do we see of working with gifted students or having gifted students from these characteristics, or just your own experiences?
The desire to learn about it, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And the depth of it.
It can be so much fun. Like, as a teacher, I love seeing kids learn. And so just seeing them dive into something is just, it warms my heart.
Let's say the drive,
Mm-hmm.
ability to even very challenging students, really great at times. Perfectionism is two-sided, so it's good because it has the drive and wants to succeed, wants to be, cares about creating, cares about what's intrinsic. But on the flip side, you know, that it's a love.
Right. Oh, definitely. Any other strengths that we see?
focused on their
Mhm. I think working with this population is so fun for that reason. As much as I joke about like, okay, I've heard enough about dinosaurs, like there's something magical about seeing a kid light up about something, seeing that passion, having students come up and be like, I'm performing, like choir's performing on Friday, can you come? Passionate about it, like, oh, what weaknesses though do we see with these characteristics? Because it is not all sunshine and rainbows.
I'd say overwhelmed because so many ideas, so many things.
Definitely.
No frustration tolerance sometimes. Like, why did I make that
Definitely. And that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about with perfectionism.
self-criticism? And you don't know about it.
That internal monologue.
Big emotions on both ends make it hard sometimes to form relationships or to maintain them, especially with others who also, and if they're not in sync.
Right. Which leads nicely to our next topic, which is asynchronous development, which is a big concept when we're talking about gifted students. So as we noted, when we're looking at gifted, we are talking about age peers, right? That considering their acceleration in terms of where students from a similar background, similar situation. What asynchronous development means is that gifted students develop out of sync. So chronologically, they are whatever their age is, but intellectually, they might be thinking several ages ahead of where they are. And emotionally, they might be at that same age or behind their age peers. So an example of this, you have an extraordinary gifted 6-year-old with an IQ of 170, has a 10-year-old mind. At 9, that child has a 15-year-old mind, and at 12, that child will have the mind of a 20-year-old. So this is an incredibly high IQ, but think about a 6-year-old thinking like a 10-year-old. Like what they are experiencing and what they're doing and what they are capable of. That's amazing. Those opportunities to do things. But in the same breath, they are processing everything like a 6-year-old. So you have a child that sits down and watches the news, they can understand what is being said on it, but they're having to rationalize and reason as a 6-year-old. That's a really difficult and scary place to be. Imagine that same child trying to make friends. Here she sits there and is trying to have a conversation with other 6-year-olds, and there are things that they can do, but there's that challenge. And it can be frustrating for everyone involved. This right here, I think, is one of my favorite examples of asynchronous development. In case you haven't realized, Calvin and Hobbes is basically a comic strip about an unidentified gifted child and his pet tiger. And so Calvin is sitting there and he says, I'm a genius, but I'm a misunderstood genius. Hobbes says, what's misunderstood about you? And he says, nobody thinks I'm a genius. And as you can see, he has put on his shirt incorrectly. He's completely missed the arms and is just going about his day. Calvin and Hobbes is filled with comics like this, where Calvin is sitting there contemplating the bigger questions of the universe and what it means to be a human, the injustice that we all face and these things, yet he can't put his shirt on right. When we look at our gifted students, there's this challenge that happens with what they think and what they're capable of, but what comes out the other end. So what appears to be bad judgment or selfishness in preteens or young teens may really be a failure of their young brains to interpret, prioritize, or predict simply because that part of the prefrontal lobe has not completely matured. We have students that are thinking at these profound levels. They're just 7, they're just 8. and they're rationalizing with it. But that also leads to the fact that asynchronous development is not balanced. It's not like we can just sit there and say, oh, well, this child has this IQ, so they're reasoning at this level, but emotionally they're here, so we know everything. It's all peaks and valleys, right? This says here, it's not unusual for a 7-year-old highly gifted child to be reading at an 8th grade level, but math abilities at a 6th grade level, and whose fine motor skills are at a 2nd grade level. So imagine taking that child who's reading at an 8th grade level, reasoning, and then say, write something, and their little 2nd grade hands can't read it. Like, that is frustrating. They've got all these big thoughts, and then they're emotionally processing it like a 2nd grader. So when we talk about gifted perfectionism, asynchronous development plays a large role in that. Because they are thinking and they're reasoning, but they're having to process in a level that might not be ready for those big ideas. You can do it. There we go. So when we're talking about perfectionism, this statistic comes from the National Association of Gifted Children, and it says that 20% of gifted students experience perfectionism in a way that creates problems. So when we're talking about perfectionism, if you do any research on it or any reading on it, you might see things where articles will describe it as both a good and a bad thing. They'll be like the good side of perfectionism. You're driven. You do really good work. And then we'll get to the bad things. The bad things seem really bad, especially when we realize to get to the good, there's usually some of these bad things, but we'll separate that. But when we look at this, there are a few things that stand out to me. 20%, so they're saying 1 in 5 gifted students experience perfectionism in a way that creates problems. Now, without working on the study itself, I would be ready to say, I would want to amend that to say 20% of gifted students experience perfectionism in a way that has not created problems yet. The 80% that haven't said that, it just means that they haven't experienced those problems yet. Because it can be a monster. The other thing is, you're surveying gifted students, going, hey, are you gifted? Are you a perfectionist? Has it been bad? If you ask me, I'm not going to be like, why, yes, I've experienced some problems, because no. Like, if you tell me this is part of a research study, I want to like put on my best foot forward. I'm going to like put on the tie and be like, let me answer your questions. Like, I question this data. It's staggering, 1 in 5. But I feel like just anecdotally from my experience, it would be that. Because again, these are just 20% of students that shared this. But also, either if they were all honest, perfectionism is going to catch up with you at some point. At some point, the balloon's going to pop. And that's a hard thing. When we look at definitions, perfectionism, we can define it as a disposition to regard anything short of perfection as unacceptable. And that's the dictionary definition. And I think it's a good example. But it's kind of a sanitary definition, because that makes it seem like, oh, well, that is not perfect, so that is unacceptable. No, Delisle and Galbraith, they wrote a book called When Gifted Kids Don't Have All the Answers. It's a really fantastic book looking at the social and emotional needs of gifted learners. If you don't have it in your library, I really recommend it. But they have their definition. Perfectionism means that you can never fail. You always need approval, and if you come in second, you're a loser. So when we look at this idea, that idea of never failing, right? That's a really scary thing. Because that idea of failure is not a statement of, I got a 50% on a test. When we're talking perfectionism, it is saying you came short of the expectations that either you set or others have set. So that could mean you got the 2nd highest grade in the class. And that is considered a failure. So even this definition, failure is not this universal like, oh, I didn't do this. This is the Diamondbacks get to the World Series, don't win it, and Corbin Carroll's like, well, I'm a failure. That's a scary place to be. The other thing is you always need approval. And so when we're talking about this idea of approval, it is not simply, I want the pat on the head. It's, I want the pat on the head the other pat on the head was better, like I got more recognition for that, or he just didn't acknowledge it. It's not negative repercussions. You want that approval. Second grade terror of a person saying that we're off time, me, was looking to my teacher to give me that thumbs up. She said, thank you, you helped me. I wanted to relive that high. But when you do it and you don't get recognition, man, that hurts. And if you go from great work to good job, what did I do wrong? I can't tell you how many emails I've sent somebody, and I'll say something, and I get a, that's fine, response. And I'm sitting in my office going, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? I've upset this person, oh my God, and they said that's fine, but I'm sitting there internalizing, reading every tone that could possibly be there. Because I didn't want to upset them. The final one is, if you come in second, you're a loser. And I was this close to putting a clip from Talladega Nights, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby, in this. And so like I looked up and I spent a portion of my time, instead of working on this, watching clips from that movie. And there were none that were appropriate. I was like, man, I could put it in. PV's not gonna ask me to talk again, but I could. And then I had to contemplate, and it was a long discussion. But it's that idea that if you're not first, you have failed. You have not met the expectation that you have set. And there are a lot of other numbers than one. And context matters a lot for that. When we talk about maladaptive perfectionism, there are some concerns that we have. Spending excessive time on tasks. If you have a gifted child, I'm sure that you have experienced here's the assignment. You are spending way too much time on said assignment. If you have a gifted child, I'm sure you have experienced anger or frustration over anything less than the desired goal. And again, that desired goal might be 100%. So getting the 95% suddenly is devastating. And what I think is really important about this, the anger or frustration over anything less than the desired goal, is that I feel like that's kind of like a pressure cooker. That you might not experience that in kindergarten. You might not experience that in first grade, second grade, third grade. And the more time that passes, you start telling yourself, this is sustainable. And then you finally get to a point where it explodes. I had a student, so I taught 7th grade at the Digital Learning Center, now the Quest program. And we started the year by reading Fahrenheit 451. So it was a challenging work for many of the kids, but I love the novel, I think it's good, and I kind of wanted to start the year with like, diving in head first. And so I gave my students a test. Across the board, the grades were not great, so I gave them an opportunity to do test corrections, because I was like, I want to value the learning over it and acknowledge that. And so I gave back the papers, and I had the student, and I've not had the student in class, but I knew of the student just in the gifted, self-contained, and all that, and we're a kid. But he got his test back, and I believe he got a B after doing his test corrections. And he looked at that, and he let out this howl. Like, not like a yell or a scream, it was like a howl, like a moan. I'm like, what is going on? And he started crying and just saying that he was stupid over this. So I tried to talk him down, but to him a B on the first test, when I told him, I was like, dude, there are so many assignments going on like this year, like this is not going to impact your grade. Like, I don't remember the points, but it was one of those things that like, I know the math and how the math is gonna math, and this is not gonna matter. And he did not want to hear it, because his desired goal was an A. Not submitting completed work. I once had twins in the DLC, and so we were going through the year, and their grades in the grade book were like opposites, right? One student had everything submitted, 100%, doing great. The other student, she had like a 40 or a 30% because she didn't turn anything in. But in class, they both performed like the same. They were engaging in discussions, asking questions. And so I called the parents in and I was like, I'm confused like about this. And so we talked to her. And she was like, oh, I've done every one of those assignments. We're like, what? And she opened her Google Drive and they were all like labeled, fully completed. She was like, I just didn't want you to tell me I didn't do them right. So I just didn't submit them. And so I have this student who has all of this completed work that she didn't submit because she would rather get the F on her terms than have me potentially tell her she did something wrong. She was very content with that 30%. So we had to spend a lot of work that year just getting her to submit work and alternatively assessing and doing things. And then finally, procrastination or refusal to begin. I'm sure you've experienced that of, I can't even start because I don't know where to start. This was me with that email of coming up with a title, which I was very proud of, and then like I'm thinking about it, it's like as I'm working this, I'm like, well, this was kind of a lie. Then it came, so.
Talk a little bit about maladaptive perfectionism.
It basically is a term used for the negative aspects of perfectionism. So if you look up,
Because perfectionism seems like a short in a sense already, right?
it does. You will find articles that address it in a, like, they'll say there's good and bad things, where you have that driven, you do well on things, you're diving deep into content and all of that. I really get uncomfortable with people referring to perfectionism as a good thing, but there are articles that do acknowledge it in that way. So
Maladaptive suggests that there is some clarity in perfectionism then.
yeah, I don't love it. I included it just because that's a common term and I wanted to be able to address that. If you see that, it's part of what's there. But no, it's, again, it's one of those things that I don't want to be like, there's some good things about perfectionism, because again, it's that boiler. And I feel like when you say there's good things about it, especially if you have like a gifted student start researching about it and say, you know what, let's look up about perfectionism, and they see, oh, there's good things about this. Okay, like I won't let the bad things happen, and it's like, you're gonna let the bad things happen, and all of that. A big thing that we need to make sure that we understand is that the pursuit of excellence means taking risks, trying new things, growing, changing, and sometimes failing. The idea of failure, and again, failure does not mean you got the F, I mean coming short of a goal, is a really important part of it. You don't lift weights and pick up the 5 pounds and you're like, I'm gonna get so buff. Like, you lift weights outside of, like, just outside to break down the muscle so that it can regrow. That's what we need. We need those risks. We need those mistakes because that's how we get feedback. That's how we grow. So, when we look at these feelings, sometimes they are intrinsic, right? They are learned from what has happened. Everything has been easy up until this point, right? You get to kindergarten and they're like, we're gonna do shapes. And you're like, I know every single shape. And that right there is a dodecahedron. And the teacher's like, this is a circle. And you're like, nah. Like, we have that. And then we try to figure out placement and everything has come easy. And then suddenly once you reach that hard place, it gets difficult. Another part is gleaned from observation, right? When you're in a classroom, you're seeing a lot of things, and gifted students are very observant, right? I don't wear my glasses. Every student is like, what happened to your glasses? Why aren't you wearing glasses? Are you wearing contacts? Dr. Graham. And I'm like, yes, like what? I wanted to not wear glasses today. But they are paying attention, right? If they get the 100% on the spelling test, and they're like, awesome, I did it. But they see the kid that got the 4 out of 10 has to stay in for lunch detention to do review. Well, if I don't get 100%, if I don't do well, I'm gonna lose recess. So they're gleaning what success and failure means. And that just fuels into those aspects of, I can't let that happen. So sometimes we contribute to these feelings of perfectionism. So I told you there was gonna be pop culture. I told you it's based out of my my experience raising a toddler. So this comes from Bluey. If you're unfamiliar with Bluey, go home and watch it on Disney Plus. But it's an animated show from Australia about a family of Australian cattle dogs, and they live in a dog society. It is so well written, so deep and meaningful and thoughtful. Seriously, go home and watch it after this presentation. But the clip I'm going to show you comes from an episode called Perfect. And in this episode, Bluey and her sister Bingo are making Father's Day cards for their dad. And Bluey says, I want my Father's Day card to be perfect. And so Mom is like, do you know what perfect means? And all of that. So they go through. And the episode basically is a clip show of adventures that Bluey and Bingo have had with their dad. Basically recounting, and it's funny. But throughout that, we see Bluey trying to make her Father's Day card.
That's a cracker.
Hey, that's what boomerang looks like.
What's wrong this time?
I don't know. It's just not perfect enough.
Perfect enough for what? Is there something you want to tell me, Bluey?
Mom, I drew you a picture.
Oh, wow!
Do you like it?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Great.
That's going straight to the fridge. Not much room up here. Look, I'm just going to put it on top of Bluey's for now. Oh, hi, Bluey.
So in that moment, Bluey's mom unintentionally told Bluey that perfect is valued, and anything less than perfect isn't there, isn't worthy of the fridge, basically. Now, knowing the show, and just even watching the scene, Bluey's mom is not sitting there saying, I'm gonna tear this kid down. She needs to make better pictures. That's not what she's saying. But we can unintentionally impact our gifted students through the ways and the messages that we use. What we're going to talk about now is we're going to talk about strategies for how to help support our gifted students. And again, none of these are a silver bullet to destroy the werewolf that is perfectionism. But these are ways that you can work through and support gifted perfectionists in coping with these feelings and helping them move forward. And even if they're feeling them, the idea is that they can move forward with them. So just for cleanliness of this, having done like my doctorate and having like parentheses that are filled with like authors, I did not include parenthetical documentation. But these are resources that I used throughout this presentation. I've got links for all the blogs and websites that I can share with Karen, and she can get them out to anyone that wants them, or you can reach out to me and I'm happy to share them. But some of the resources that I wanted to highlight, A Teacher's Guide to Supporting Gifted Middle Schoolers by DJ Graham. That was one that I used for this. Teaching Gifted Kids in Today's Classroom. This is another one that is geared toward teachers, but that is one of the foundational gifted texts that teachers utilize. It's a really strong example of giving foundations to understand your gifted student. And even if you're not a teacher, while the pedagogical discussions of like differentiation can get kind of teachery, I do think it's a valuable read just to understand what it is your students need academically, so that when you're advocating for them, you're advocating for the right things. And then When Gifted Kids Don't Have All the Answers by Delisle and Galbraith, that is one that focuses really heavily on social and emotional needs of gifted students. It's another one that I strongly recommend. And then these are different blogs and websites that I've looked at, good resources, I'm happy to share them. But when we go through and talk about strategies, there are three that I want us to look at: feedback, expectations and goal setting, and then modeling. So when we talk about feedback, this is a really important one, because this is the most direct way that we communicate to our gifted students what is expected, how they did, and help them to understand this idea of growth. So when we're looking at this, there are three basic ways that I think we need to think about our feedback, and that is being specific, being mindful, and being process focused. So when I say specific, we want to make sure that it's specific to our expectations, the goal, and that it's providing support and evidence to help students support that. right? When we are going through, we want to avoid ideas like great work, good job, you can do better, because that gives them nothing to work on. It gives them nothing tangible to grasp. The more specific we can be, the clearer it becomes for our gifted students about, well, what did I do well? And what is an area that I can grow in? And notice that I said an area to grow in, not what did I do wrong? Because that's an important paradigm shift, right? When I work with the teachers and I talk to them about that, I said your gifted students might get 100% on the assignment, but there are still things for them to work on, regardless of the grade that's in the grade book. Frankly, the grade isn't the important thing. What's important is that they're learning and that they understand the steps to growing. When we're giving that feedback, we need to make sure that we're giving them those tangible examples and understand, hey, you did this well. This is something that, I noticed that we can continue to grow on, right? For teachers, that's really easy to do because you're literally in a position to grade assignments. Another thing is that we want to make sure our feedback is mindful and that it can be heard from our gifted students, right? Gifted perfectionists can be incredibly vulnerable, right? Think about anything that you've ever created. There's a level of vulnerability. Put your heart and soul into something, right? I think the example that I think we can all align with is cooking, right? You take time, you cook, you get the ingredients, you chop it, you cook it, and you give it to somebody, and then you wait. And you want to see that bite. Because this might be your favorite dish in the world. You want some sort of positive reaction, but it's vulnerable, it's scary. I've had so many students when we've done presentations, like video presentations. When I was at the DLC, we did a lot of videos. So they would record movies and multimedia things. It was a technology infused thing. But they would make this video and they would walk out the room. Like we would hit play and they would walk out. Because they didn't want to be judged on what was there. We need to be mindful to make sure that they are in a position to hear our feedback. Because I will tell you, when your child is melting down, that is not the time to be sitting there and saying, well, let's talk about your perfectionistic tendencies, and they're not going to hear it. One strategy I have for mindfulness, or being mindful when giving feedback, is the traffic lights approach. So at my school, when we do with students, but also as teachers, we'll do collaborative inquiry, we'll share research with each other and things that we've written. And before we have those meetings, we will go through and we will basically do a red, yellow, or green. A green means I am open to receiving feedback. A yellow means I'm okay to share and hear, but I need you to be careful because I'm in a vulnerable place. And that can be because of the content of what's been created, or it could just be my dog is sick and I'm in a really I'm threadbare, or a red, I am not open to receiving feedback right now. This is one of those things that works. Our teachers, we use this, and there's a level of trust with it. With students, I use this as well. When we're doing peer reviewing, I've told them, I need to know, where are you at with receiving feedback on this? And they'll be honest. I'm green, I'm good, I'm yellow, or not today. Now, sometimes kids will use red as a crutch. We need to work through that. But when you're working with your gifted perfectionists, if they finish something, you say, how did it go? Well, I don't know, can you read it? That's done. Where are you at? And you don't have to use red, yellow, green, but you can just ask, I'm happy to read it. Do you want me to talk through things to work on, or do you just want positives right now? And we can talk about things to work on later. But giving them that foundation and that control is a really meaningful thing for a world that feels really uncontrollable. And then we want our feedback to be process focused. So when we look at this, oftentimes when we are doing something, we look at the end goal, right? As a teacher, it's here's the content, do the project, here's the final grade. Do the research paper, here's the final grade, here's the test. We get so wrapped up in did you win or lose that it ignores all of the middle part that is so important. When we're looking at everything going on, we want to consider the work that went into it. And so we're going to look at Blue's Clues for this. I told you, I've got a 4-year-old. So the way we give feedback, we want our gifted child to see the value in the process, not just the end result. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the goodbye song from the original Blue's Clues from the 90s.
Hey, thank you so much for all your help today. Now it's time for so long, but we'll sing just one more song. Thanks for doing your part. You sure are smart. You know, with me and you and my dog Blue, we can do anything that we wanna do. Bye-bye. See you later.
So in 2019, they rebooted Blue's Clues, called Blue's Clues and You. And we're going to watch
Hey,
it.
thank you so much for all your help today. Hey, thank.
All right, we're going to watch the updated goodbye song from Blue's Clues and You.
Now it's time for so long. Oh, but we're gonna sing one more song. We usually do, right? Yeah. Thanks for doing your part. You sure are smart and worked really hard.
With me and you and our friend Blue, you can do anything that you wanna do. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
So in that, they added an additional line of, you sure are smart, you sure worked hard. That line is so valuable, especially when we think of providing feedback for our gifted students. Because the original line, I mean, it's a great song, but the original line of you sure are smart says the value is that we solved Blue's Clues and you were smart. And that's a great message. But what about the kid that had to work really hard to put those clues together? As a teacher, I get the paper at the end. I don't see the fact that that student stayed up till 3 a.m. every night for a week, trying to get it to the standards that he or she saw fit. That hard work is a place that we often miss in giving feedback because we get so focused on the end result. That process is important. So when we're giving feedback to our gifted students, it becomes really valuable to highlight not just this is great, that's a great picture. Highlight those struggles that they had. You know, I saw you looking when you were drawing that. I saw you trying to find the right color for the sky, and it did a great job. You know, you shot the winning basket in your basketball game. I've seen you practicing, and it really paid off how you did that and worked toward that. And I really appreciate that you didn't give up when your team was down. Those pieces of feedback are not only specific, but they're addressing the struggle that they went through. That acknowledgement is really, really important. Next slide. So again, acknowledging the process to a goal will help your students realize that hard work is important. That you've seen all of those nights that they've struggled and that it's part of it, and that it contributed to the end result. So when we talk about expectations and goal setting, this becomes a really important one because we want to be looking at progress-focused goals, not just the end result. I've worked with a lot of gifted students who have really lofty ambitions, right? They come in and they say, this is what the end is going to be. And I've got this in mind. I am going to MIT. I'm going to end global warming. I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And those goals are amazing, but they are gigantic. And the path to that goal has a lot of steps. And when you get through each of those steps, it can seem insurmountable. especially if you reach challenge. So when we're talking about like an end focus, a long-term goal, that would be something like, I want to be a chess grandmaster, right? The progress focused goal is, in my next game, I'm going to focus on not separating my pawns. I'm going to keep them defended. Giving that specific feedback helps them to get to develop those focused goals. But if we just focus on what is the end goal, getting to college, all we're doing is ignoring all the steps to get there. And that places all the value on the end, and anything that is shy of that goal is now deemed a failure. But if we help our gifted students look at, well, what is our incremental buildup toward that, it can be really, really helpful. I coached basketball when I taught 7th grade, and I loved it because there were so many things that I was able to address. And so if you haven't experienced middle school festival sports, it's really great the way PV does it, because basically in the festival part, any student that comes out gets to participate as part of the team, right? Doesn't matter if you are the greatest player in your club or you have never held a basketball or whatever it might be. You come out, you are part of the team, and it is great. You get to practice, and from there, the coaches will choose their all-star team, which then continues on. And so when I was at the DLC, I would be really open with my kids. Like, I'm coaching basketball. All of you should come out and do it. It's a lot of fun. I'm there, like, trust me. So we get a lot of DLC kids that would come out, and they have very varying skill levels. I had some club players, I had some kids that this was the first time that they'd ever come out and played basketball. And I had to deal with a lot of meltdowns of, I'm not as good as that person. I'm like, well, they've been playing club basketball since they were 8. And have you ever played this game? No. Did you watch this game? No. So I'm not as good. Okay. But we looked at, well, let's set some goals. And they could be as basic as, for today, all I want you to focus on is dribbling. Even if you miss every shot you take, or you don't take a shot, I want you to focus on dribbling today. Then it's passing, or whatever it might be. But we have these incremental goals. If your goal is to make the all-star team, we might not do that this year. How do we get there? If this is important to you, let's look at how we get there. And so those become really, really meaningful pieces that you can build in. Because it gives that attainable, and I don't know if you're like me, but I love having a checklist where I can check off things. And sometimes if I've completed things, I'll add things to my checklist so I can check it off. Because it just feels satisfying to make that progress. And so for our gifted students, that piece becomes really important. What are the steps to get there? And how do we step back all the way to where you are? It might be a long list, but let's start making progress toward that goal if that's what you really care about. And sometimes your gifted student will look and say, you know what? For a game I've never played and I just watched the Queen's Gambit, that's not really my goal. Or they might say, I am all in, and this is important to me, and I'm going to build that. But giving those goals helps set something tangible for them so that they don't play their first chess match, lose, and like, well, I'm never going to be a grandmaster. Well, everyone has to lose at some point. Again, this works in tandem with feedback, as it can be a determining factor of what next steps are. So you're able to talk about those growth points of, this is where we're at. Let's be clear, and let's build toward that. Even with incremental and progress-focused goals, time can be an overwhelming factor for gifted perfectionists, right? We set a goal, and they're going to spend as much time as they can reaching that goal. And that can be a hard place to be. So when we are looking at this, there are 2 time-focused strategies that I think are really valuable. The last one I'm going to talk about, but the first one is consider task value, right? And this can be a hard one for gifted students to wrap their head around. But when you're working on school assignments, look at the amount of points that go behind, but go for an assignment, and really weigh out. You know, in elementary school, the teacher is controlling all the pieces typically, right? Students might move for some classes, but the teacher has the guidance of what homework and what is happening. Once students get to middle and high school, you're starting to add more and more classes. And we just look at 4 core classes, right? History, math, science, and English. If a teacher assigns 30 minutes of homework for each, that's 2 hours. If your gifted student adds an extra 2 hours on top of that, they are now doing 4 hours of homework for that class. There's only so many hours in the day. And if they get out of school at 3, they have something after school, or they just come home and take a break, and they're working for 4 hours. That is concerning. So evaluating the value behind a task can be really important. I work with a lot of kids that are stressing about their science homework. They're like, okay, well, how big is the assignment? Well, 10 points. I'm like, how many points is the class out of? And they're like, well, we've got 300 so far. I'm like, I don't think your teacher wants you to spend 45 minutes on this worksheet. Pretty sure they do. I'm like, well, let's talk to them. So evaluating the points behind an assignment allows the students to at least prioritize what is going on. For this one and the time maximums, it's really important that you work in tandem with the teacher to understand A, the messaging going home about assignments, and B, so that you are in support with each other about that. Letting the teacher know, they typically spend an hour on each assignment for your class. It's worth 10 points and they're really stressed. I'm going to tell them to stop at a certain point and to not do it. It's not a lack of value. The majority of teachers I'm encountered, they will see that and be like, oh no, I want to help this kid. The other piece is time limits. And this can be a tricky one. And so when you are working with teachers, I've done this with many students where parents are like, my kid will not stop. You give them the assignment and they're going to research for 4 hours before they've even started what they need to do. Like, I don't know what to do. So what I would do as a teacher is I would talk to the student and the parents and say, I want them working on this no longer than 30 minutes. And that's not 30 minutes to get the assignment done. That's, I don't want them working beyond 30 minutes. And then as the teacher, I would say I want a conference with them to see where they are. For some students, they would finish the assignment and we would be good. For some students, they would spend 29 of those 30 minutes researching and then try to work for a minute and we would stop. And I was very clear with the parents, I'm not going to penalize them for this. I want to talk with them and work through this with them. But that time maximum allowed me to assess with the student what they were doing during that time. How did you spend your time? Were you just researching? Were you, let's go through your history. I've seen several students that write the assignment, they would delete it, rewrite the assignment, delete it, and I could see the history of everything they did. Some students, it was a refusal to even start, but having that time maximum gave me an idea of how they were using the time for an assignment that I didn't expect to take 30 minutes. Now, we want to be careful that we don't say this is a time limit to get the assignment done. Because that's just setting your gifted students up to panic and be like, So the wording is really important. But if you have a situation where your child is spending hours and hours and hours, talk with their teacher about how long should this assignment realistically take. And we're trying to work through this and work through that idea with them. Right? With both of these, it's really important that you and the teacher are sending the same message home. Because it doesn't work if they're hearing one thing at home and one thing at school. So working together is really important. We want to make sure that we communicate our expectations really clearly. Now, teaching gifted students for a long time, I would hear this statement from parents. I don't care how my child does in school as long as they do their best. Which, the sentiment is really, really meaningful. But what I saw happen more often than I would want is I would say, well, your child got a B, that's a good grade. And the parent's response would be, but that's not their best. We tell our students this, we need to make sure that we live by what that means. need to make sure that we're communicating what is success. How are we looking at what they do? And we want to make sure that we're clear with that, because what happens is your students start realizing what is said is different than the reality of what happens. We have to realize that we're gifted perfectionists. Them getting a B and being okay with it is a huge win. The GPAs will be fine. But saying you can do better, that's hard. Because our gifted students, they're watching everything going on around them. They look to the adults at how to react. This comic, I think, is a pretty good example of kids looking to us for how to react. Little boy running up says, "Daddy, look how fast I can run," and then gets hit by a meteor. The woman says, "Oh, no, you're a kid." And he says, "Shh, don't react, just smile." The kid runs up and says, "Daddy, a meteor hit me. Did you see?" "I saw, buddy. Very cool." And then the caption at the bottom says, "I'm nearly certain that kids are indestructible if you don't acknowledge their pain." When my daughter was learning to walk, she would like toddle around and fall down, and my wife and I would cheer. We'd be like, "Yay!" whenever she would fall, because we didn't want her to be scared of it, and we wanted her to realize that like it's not a scary thing. And so she would get the and look to us, and we'd be like, "Ah!" and she'd be like, "Oh, okay," and then get up and be fine and not cry. It's a silly comic, but our reactions to our gifted students a lot about what failure is, what failure is not. That it's okay to come in second place. That we're proud of them. That those pieces are part of growing up and being human. Now, that is not to say if your child is getting straight Fs and they're like, "Hey, I'm good, I'm not a perfectionist anymore," that's probably a time to like intervene and be like, "Okay, we need to find a middle ground here." But what I mean is, there's a lot of fear. When I was looking up this topic, there's a WikiHow article about how to show your parents a bad grade. And it is exceptionally long about preparing for the discussion, sharing your side, listening to the parent side, and what to do after. And it's like, choose the right time and place. Don't do it in public. It's like, is this a breakup? What is happening? Like, and I read it, and it just made me sad. Just to think of the fear and anxiety that comes with that. And obviously, if a kid gets a bad grade on a test, like we want them to do better. We want them to improve. We want them to show mastery, show knowledge of the subject. But if a kid gets a C, I mean, they might have not studied, and we can talk through that with them. I don't feel like that's a grade worth being terrified about. Even if we are disappointed or frustrated, we want them to know that they are safe and we value them. Talk about those pieces that they could work on, but we want to make sure that that feedback is supportive. So when we talk about modeling, that's the last piece that we have. And like I said, our gifted students are very observant. They're paying attention to everything that we are doing. They're watching us, focusing on us. We need to show them how to act in the world. We need to model that things might not go apart according to plan and that mistakes are part of life. So we're going to look at another Calvin and Hobbes comic that's one of my favorites. Calvin is standing there and he says, "Mom, hey mom," and she says, "Calvin, stop yelling across the house. If you want to talk to me, walk over to the living room where I am." He walks over and he says, "I stepped in dog do, where's the hose?" We need to show that it is okay to make mistakes. We are not perfect. As a teacher, I make a lot of mistakes. I can't tell you how many typos are in presentations and how many gifted students call out those typos. Where I've seen teachers struggle is when a gifted student calls out something or points out a problem. And the teacher's like, "I'm not wrong." It's like, well, boy, you're ending up in a power struggle with a 12-year-old. This does not end up well for you. But what we're telling our students when we are not willing to make mistakes, or show them that we make mistakes, mistakes aren't okay. I want you to make mistakes, but it's not okay if I make mistakes. We need to model that for them. We need to show things didn't go according to plan. That's okay. We can still have a good day. Something silly happened. Whatever it might be, but we need to show them that it is okay. We also need to model that sometimes we need to break routines and expectations. So going back to the terror of a second grader I was with at the time, it got to a point where my second grade teacher called my mother and said, listen, he's great academically, he's doing what he should, but he keeps correcting me about the time. And so she talked to my mom about just my perfectionistic tendencies. And the thing she encouraged was break up his routine. Show him it is okay. So go according to plan. So my mother did something really terrible. She took me to ice cream after bedtime. I was a kid that would put myself to bed. I was very regimented about that. I would punish myself if I got a bad grade on a test, which, if you gleaned anything, it probably wasn't as bad as in my mind I had made it out to be. But my mom took me to ice cream after bedtime, and that was not the norm. But we need to show that sometimes we break routines. If you're running late, it's okay to not make your bed that morning. There are some non-negotiables. Brush your teeth and wash your hands. But there's some other things that we can let go. We need to show that that is okay. Because if we're running late and, trust me, at a 4-year-old, getting out of the house is hard enough. But if we sit there and say, no, you've got to make your bed. And we're running late, and I'm yelling, and my daughter's like, I'm stressed about what is going on. What are we learning in that situation? We're learning that the bed being made is the most important thing to keep a perfect house, and that we're going to get angry if that doesn't happen, and we're all stressed. Let some things go and talk about it after. Hey, this morning we were running really late and it was stressful, and we didn't get to make the bed like we normally do. Why were we running late? And talk about it. And get there. A breakup routine. We need to model that even the greatest are not perfect. So Michael Jordan, considered the greatest of all time in basketball. Whenever I bring this up to like middle and high school, or someone's like, LeBron! And I'm like, stop. Like, no, just stop. Which, by the way, well, the Suns are playing tonight in the quarterfinals. This is a tournament, so thank you for being here. But if we look at his field goal percentage, Michael Jordan is over 3 seasons shot a 49.7%. Less than 50% of the baskets Michael Jordan shot went in. For all intents and purposes, we know 50% as a failing grade. I would be remiss to tell Michael Jordan that he failed. In baseball, batting 300, you are having a stellar season. That means you are batting 30% out of every at-bat. You are getting on base or getting a hit 30% of the time. And it's not just sports. There are so many examples of people that we look up to, that had giant failures. One of my favorite assignments that I would do with my students was an assignment called Why Do We Fall? Or Why Do We Fall? And it's a quote after Batman Begins. Bruce Wayne falls and his dad is like, why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up. That's the whole message that runs throughout the movie. If you have not seen Batman Begins, I highly recommend you go watch Batman Begins as well. You have one. But so we would start the year, and we would do this assignment called Why Do We Fall? Where I would ask the students, who is a hero that you have? And it needs to be a hero that you could research. Your uncle might be amazing, but it doesn't work for this assignment. So who is a hero that you have? And so the kids would identify a hero, somebody that they look up to, somebody researchable. And then the assignment would be, I want you to present about their failures. I do not want to hear a single good thing that they did. I want you to tell me the failures that they had. And so obviously these were big enough names that like Taylor Swift shows up on the screen and we're not like, I wonder what she's done. Like, we know Taylor Swift, but having students sit there and talk about the struggles that somebody they look up to had, that's really valuable for a gifted student that sees failure in anything short of first. So I highly encourage you to have those discussions. Do those deep dives. If your child is obsessed with somebody, look up the struggles that they had. Talk to them about it. You look up who that person is and know who they are and what struggles they've had, so that you can speak to those things. And that's a really meaningful thing for students to experience and to see modeled in people that they look up to. Because we see the end results, right? We see the Eras tour. We're like, oh my gosh. We don't realize that she was breaking down because Reputation didn't get nominated for a Grammy. Those are important things for gifted students to see. And the final thing is, it's important for us to model that it's normal to be vulnerable. So we're gonna circle back around to the Bluey clip and we're gonna see how that all shakes out.
I'm sorry, kid. I'm not perfect, I'm afraid.
That's okay.
Being a parent's tough.
So is drawing.
Yeah, so is drawing. But listen, how many times have you banged your knee or scratched yourself playing with your dad?
No, dang it! Oh, you right, mate?
Yeah, I just banged my knee.
I am sick of this boomerang!
Lots. And what's the first thing he always says?
Don't tell your mum.
What?
It's Dad! Yeah, I'll come back later.
What else does he always say?
Well, Bluey, it's a good thing you're tough. It's a good thing you're tough. It's a good thing you're tough.
So yeah, drawing is tough, but
It's a good thing I'm tough?
yep.
Happy Father's Day!
Aw, thanks, kids. Wow, look at these pictures. These are brilliant. They're going straight to the fridge. Out of the way, Power Bill. There. Perfect.
No. So one of the things I love about that book is that Mom is vulnerable about the fact that she made a mistake. And that parenting is hard. When we look at supporting our gifted students, there are going to be a lot of mistakes. And that's a scary place to be. Like, we look at everything, like when we have a child, you want to do everything right. And you want them to do well, you want them to be successful. But it's hard. And it's important to model that for them. We need to model that it's okay to be overwhelmed. It's okay to be stressed. It's normal. And we're there to support them. And then, you're not going to be perfect in doing this. I know I've worked with gifted students for 12 years, and I still make mistakes. I look at things that I've done and I'm like, whew, I would not do that way again. But that's okay. Because as long as you're coming from a place of sincerity, gifted students are going to see that. So, thank you for coming tonight. Are there any questions we have? So, I do not have raffle cards, but I have index cards. So, I'm going to pass around index cards if you would like to be entered for the raffle. Go ahead and write your name on the index card. I will go ahead and draw.
Oh, yeah, I know. I should have done.
What was that? Oh.
We're just saying that our online audience cannot participate in Ruffles,
Oh.
unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think he's just gonna throw his,
Yeah, you had about 18 people online.
Did you call it a turn? I thought about it. I thought about it.
A lot of pressure though. Carmen, running.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, DJ.
Thank you.
So, thank you. We hope that you walk away with information that will help you with your gifted learners. I will be the first one to tell you, I have 5 children, 3 of whom are gifted identified. And I am proof positive that you can screw up and they still survive. So, don't give up. You can still screw up. It's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank